5 words, that is all it took. 5 words typed on a phone, posted without a press agent, without a media strategy, without so much as a single phone call to a publicist. And yet those 5 words managed to accomplish something that no trade, no signing, no front office announcement has been able to do in the history of women's professional sports. They redirected the emotional center of an entire major American sports city, a city that was actively grieving the loss of its own franchise player, and pointed it somewhere else entirely. Not toward a rival team, not toward a superstar signing, toward a cookie competition, toward Caitlin Clark. And in the 48 hours that followed, while every sports media outlet in America was screaming about franchise malpractice and trades and dysfunction and the collapse of the Chicago Sky, the Indiana Fever were sitting in Indianapolis watching their blueprint execute itself in real time, piece by piece, move by move, exactly the way it was drawn up. Nobody was covering that story. Nobody was connecting those dots. The cookie tweet got its 15 minutes, got its hot takes, got its jokes, and then the media machine moved on to the next thing. But what happened on April 6, 2026 is not a fun viral story for a slow news day. It is the single clearest demonstration of what Caitlin Clark's cultural gravity actually means in concrete, measurable, strategic terms, and what it means for every decision Indiana makes from here until the championship is decided. So let's fix the coverage. Let's go deeper than the surface. Let's talk about what actually happened, why it happened, and what it means for the most dangerous roster-building operation in women's basketball right now. Because once you understand the mechanism underneath this story, you are never going to look at this Indiana Fever offseason the same way again. Not the Mitchell signing, not the Hull situation, not the Cunningham return, not the free agent whispers about Alana Smith and Azurá Stevens, not the salary cap math that the critics are getting completely backwards. All of it connects. All of it flows from the same source, and the cookie tweet is the proof of concept that makes the entire argument airtight. Let's set the stage properly, because context matters here. April 6, 2026, the WNBA officially opens its off-season window, and within hours, the first major shockwave of the period hits with full force. The Chicago Sky trade Angel Reese, 2-time All-Star, face of the franchise, the most polarizing and most marketable figure in women's basketball outside of one specific player, to the Atlanta Dream. The return package? 2 first-round draft picks, projected to land somewhere in the middle of the lottery, mid-teens, not top 5 selections that could rebuild a franchise overnight. Mid-round picks that represent hope at best and filler at worst, depending on how Atlanta's roster develops over the next couple of seasons. The reaction is immediate and brutal. CBS Sports does not mince words. They hand a Sky a letter grade of F. Not a C for a questionable gamble, not a D for a bad trade, an F, full stop, no asterisk, no nuance. Former players who have been around this league long enough to have context about franchise-defining decisions shake their heads publicly. Analysts who cover the WNBA professionally and who are generally careful not to over-editorialize start using words like malpractice without any visible discomfort. Sky fans flood social media with a combination of confusion, betrayal, and grief that reads like the fan base of a team that just watched something irreplaceable walk out the door for almost nothing in return. And here is the thing about Angel Reese specifically that makes this trade hit differently than a typical star for picks deal. Reese is not just a basketball player to Chicago. She is a cultural anchor. She is the player who made games at Wintrust Arena feel like events. She is the reason casual fans who had never watched a women's NBA game in their lives suddenly had an opinion about women's basketball. She is controversy and charisma and magnetic energy wrapped in a basketball uniform. And for better or worse, that kind of player is extraordinarily difficult to replace. You do not find another Angel Reese in the mid-teens of the draft. You build around someone like that for years, and you hope the chemistry and the storylines and the cultural momentum compound into something that actually contends. Chicago just traded all of that for picks, and the city knew it. Sky fans knew it in their bones. That morning, April 6, 2026, Chicago woke up as a basketball city in mourning. That is the emotional state of the city when Caitlin Clark picks up her phone. Here is what Caitlin Clark actually did, because you need the full picture to understand the weight of it. The Chicago Cubs, celebrating their 150th season anniversary, posted a fan engagement challenge. They were asking fans to submit original cookie recipes to potentially be served as concession stand offerings at Wrigley Field during the anniversary year. It's a wholesome, community-oriented campaign, the kind of thing that generates warm engagement and gets passed around in Cubs fan circles for a day or two. Genuinely nice, genuinely fun, completely harmless. Clark, who has been a lifelong Cubs fan in the way that people from the Midwest often adopt Chicago teams as their own, sees the post. She does not call her agent, she does not ask her social media team to draft something, she does not consult anyone about whether this is the right moment, or the right platform, or the right message. She pulls up the Cubs tweet, hits quote tweet, and types 5 words, "Would love to be the taste tester," sends it. Probably puts her phone down and goes back to whatever she was doing. The Cubs respond within minutes. Absolutely. 2 words, no hesitation, no routing it through the PR department for approval. They see Caitlin Clark offering to participate in their anniversary campaign, and they respond the way any reasonable organization would respond when one of the most famous athletes in American sports offers to attach herself to your brand moment. They say yes immediately and with enthusiasm. And then, Chicago explodes. Not in the way city fan bases react to trade news, not with the bitter, complicated emotion that was already swirling around the Sky situation. Chicago explodes in the way that happens when something cuts through all the noise and gives people something uncomplicated and joyful to latch onto. Fans flood the comment sections, they flood Twitter, they flood Instagram. One person posts that the Sky just made room on the roster for her. Another says she should pitch for the Cubs while she's at it. Someone else says Chicago deserves Clark more than Indiana does, and means it only half-jokingly. The content is immediate and dense and enthusiastic, and it is pointing in one direction. Caitlin Clark is trending in Chicago. Not Angel Reese, not the Chicago Sky, not the trade that had consumed every sports conversation in the city for the previous several hours. Caitlin Clark is the dominant story in Chicago on the day Chicago lost its franchise player. She is trending in a city that her team does not even call home over a story that has nothing to do with basketball because of 5 words and a baking competition. Take a moment with that, because if you're still treating this as a cute celebrity interaction or a funny viral moment, you are missing the entire point of what just happened. Here is what most channels covering this story got completely wrong, and it is a fundamental mistake that leads you away from the actual substance of what occurred. The tweet is not the story. The Cubs' response is not the story. The Chicago fans reacting in real time while their team is falling apart is not the story. Those are the visible layer. Those are the things you can screenshot and clip and make content about for 24 hours before the algorithm moves on. The real story is the mechanism underneath all of it. The reason a quote tweet about a baking competition carries the kind of cultural force that redirects an entire city's attention. The reason 5 words from one specific person can cut through 48 hours of trade drama and franchise chaos and dominate a news cycle without a single basketball being involved. That mechanism has a name. It is Clark's cultural gravity. And it is not a metaphor. It is not a media narrative. It is a measurable, demonstrable, real phenomenon that has been operating at increasing scale ever since Clark's college days at Iowa and has reached a level of intensity in the WNBA that genuinely has no historical precedent in women's professional sports. And here is the part that transforms this from an interesting cultural observation into a strategic argument with real consequences. Clark's cultural gravity is not separate from the Indiana Fever's championship strategy. It is the championship strategy. It is the engine that makes the blueprint function. It is the reason everything Indiana is doing this offseason is working faster, more efficiently, and at lower cost than any comparable roster-building effort anywhere in the league. To understand how that works in practice, you have to look at what Indiana has actually done in the first 48 hours of this offseason. And when you see it laid out in sequence, you start to understand why the rest of the league should be genuinely concerned. Start with Kelsey Mitchell, because Mitchell is the first domino, and she tells you everything about how this dynamic operates at the contract level. Heading into this offseason, Mitchell was a legitimate, unrestricted free agent in the truest sense of the term. She had supermax caliber value. She's an explosive, quick, dangerous guard who can create her own shot, finish in traffic, and operate as a secondary offensive engine next to the league's best playmaker. Multiple teams around the WNBA would have put real money and real effort into recruiting her. The open market was a genuine option. She could have generated competition. She could have maximized her value through the process that the market is supposed to provide. She did not do any of that. Mitchell signed the $1.4 million Supermax extension and locked herself into Indiana before free agency even reached full temperature. The process that should have taken weeks of conversations and meetings and competing offers was over before most front offices had finished their internal evaluation sessions.
Why? Mitchell explained her reasoning, but the answer was already visible to anyone paying attention. Because Caitlin Clark went on NBC on national television with a full audience watching and told the country that signing Kelsey Mitchell was Indiana's first priority. She called Mitchell her running mate. She used the kind of language that carries actual emotional weight, that communicates genuine partnership and mutual investment, not just roster construction. And when the most recognizable athlete in your sport goes on a national broadcast and tells the world that you are indispensable to what she's trying to build, you do not test the market. You do not sit in a room with competing offers and run spreadsheets comparing contract values. You run toward what is being offered, because what is being offered is not just a contract. It is a seat at the table where history gets made. That is Clark's gravity operating at the contract level, not through intimidation, not through organizational pressure, not through financial leverage, through the simple, undeniable fact that proximity to Clark means something in the WNBA right now that no other situation in the league can match. Mitchell understood that. She acted accordingly. Indiana retains their supermax guard without a bidding war, without a prolonged negotiation, without any of the uncertainty that typically accompanies a free agency process involving a player of Mitchell's caliber. One domino, 48 hours, done. Lexie Hull operates on slightly different mechanics, but the end result points in the same direction. Hull is a restricted free agent, which means Indiana has the legal right to match any offer she receives from another team. But the structure of her situation goes deeper than the contractual technicality. Hull spent last season in the locker room, on the court, on the bench, watching what this Indiana Fever team looked like from the inside. And crucially, she had the specific vantage point of watching what this team looked like during the 13 games last season when Clark was actually healthy and fully operational. The numbers from those 13 games are not complicated to interpret. 16.5 points per game, 8.8 assists. Those are not just impressive individual statistics, those are ecosystem statistics. 8.8 assists per game means that every cutter's path gets easier because defenders are collapsing. Every corner shooter's catch is arriving in rhythm because the pass is perfectly timed and perfectly placed. Every secondary scorer's usage increases because the defense is making an impossible choice about how to allocate their attention. Hull watched an offensive ecosystem that most players in this league would sacrifice real contract dollars to be part of. She was inside it. She felt what it meant to play alongside someone who makes the entire court function differently. She is not leaving that. The restricted qualifying offer is as good as accepted, not because Indiana is trapping her, but because Ho made a rational evaluation of her options, and Indiana's offer is the one that makes the most sense given everything she has seen from the inside. The Clark effect is not just a media talking point for Hull. It is a personal, professional, lived experience that she spent an entire season accumulating evidence about, and that evidence points clearly in one direction. Then there's Sophie Cunningham, and Cunningham's story is the one that tells the full version of what Clark proximity can do to a career trajectory. Cunningham is an unrestricted free agent, no restrictions. She could go anywhere in the league tomorrow. There are teams that would welcome a tough, versatile wing defender who brings an edge and a physical presence that soft rosters desperately need. She has real options. She has real market value. But here is what Cunningham's situation looked like before last season and what it looks like now, and the distance between those two things is the entire argument. Before her time in Indiana, Cunningham was a respected veteran, solid, reliable, a professional who had put in her time and earned her place in the league. But she was not a cultural figure. She did not have 1 million social media followers. She was not the kind of player whose name resonated beyond the committed WNBA fan base. Last season changed everything. Cunningham became Clark's enforcer, the player who stepped into physical confrontations, who protected her teammate at personal cost, who chipped an actual tooth defending Clark against Jacqueline Sheldon and became a viral sensation doing it. The image of Cunningham going toe-to-toe to protect Clark circulated across every platform. It was genuine and raw, and it resonated with fans who had never paid attention to her before because it told a story about loyalty and toughness that people connect with on an instinctual level. Her social media following cracked 1 million. 1 million followers for a veteran role player who had spent years in this league without generating that kind of broad attention.
She went from respected professional to genuine cultural figure in a single season, and she did it entirely through her connection to one player. Through proximity to Clark's gravity, Cunningham's own profile was amplified in ways that her individual career trajectory had never suggested was possible. You think she walks away from that? You think she trades a clear, demonstrated pathway toward greater fame, greater visibility, greater opportunities, and a legitimate championship run for a fresh start somewhere that offers none of those foundations? Cunningham is coming back to Indiana. That is not a prediction built on hope. That outcome is already embedded in the structure of what Clark has built around herself. It is a rational conclusion drawn from rational incentives. So in the first 48 hours of the offseason, before most other franchises had even convened their first internal planning sessions, Indiana had already locked in, or effectively locked in, Mitchell, Hull, and Cunningham, 3 players who form a critical structural layer around the core. Add Clark herself, Aaliyah Boston, and Erica Wheeler all under contract before free agency opened. That is 6 foundational pieces secured before the rest of the league had fully woken up to what was available on the market. No other team in this league moved with that speed. No other team moved with that clarity of purpose. While other front offices were still debating priorities and running evaluation processes and having the kinds of circular internal conversations that slow organizations down, Indiana had already constructed the frame of the house. The foundation was poured, the structure was up. What remained was targeted addition, and Indiana knows exactly what it is targeting and why. Let's talk about Elana Smith, because this is the acquisition that transforms Indiana from a championship contender into something significantly more frightening to face in a playoff series. Smith was the co-defensive player of the year last season. She averaged close to 2 blocks per game. 2 blocks per game with real, meaningful shot deterrence that extends beyond the box score number, the kind of interior presence that makes opposing offenses change their play calling, that forces teams to rethink how they attack the rim, that creates downstream effects on defensive rotations that compound over the course of a game. But here is the detail that elevates Smith from valuable defensive piece to genuinely unique player at this level. She shoots above 40% from 3 on real volume, real attempts, not the kind of token perimeter shooting that a big player takes occasionally to keep defenses honest. Actual floor spacing production from the perimeter combined with elite rim protection in the interior. That combination almost does not exist in this league. You can find rim protectors, you can find stretch bigs, Finding a player who does both at high level, who can deter shots at the basket and then step out to the three-point line and punish defenses for sagging off her, that is the kind of unicorn acquisition that changes what a team is capable of defensively in ways that are extremely difficult to scheme against. Multiple credible reports going into this free agency period have pointed to genuine mutual interest between Smith and Indiana. This is not confirmed. This is firmly in the category of market signals and sourced conversations rather than done deals, and it's important to be clear about that distinction. Speculation presented as fact is how sports media misleads people, and that is not what this is. What this is a well-sourced indication that the fit has been identified on both sides, that conversations are pointing in an encouraging direction, and that the basketball logic is so obvious and so compelling that it functions almost as its own argument. Think about what pairing Smith with Aaliyah Boston actually does to Indiana's defensive architecture. Boston is versatile, skilled, and intelligent enough to switch defensively across multiple positions and guard perimeter players when the scheme demands it. She is not a traditional power forward in the sense of being a stationary post presence. She moves, she reads, she communicates. Put Smith behind her as the interior anchor, and you have a defensive frontcourt that playoff opponents would need weeks of film study just to begin formulating answers to. Boston's versatility and lateral quickness on the perimeter, Smith's rim deterrence and floor spacing behind her. That is a combination that does not currently exist on any roster in this league, not even close. Indiana has identified that structural void in their game. Smith is the answer to that exact question. The signals are pointing in the right direction, and the Clark effect, the recognition that being on this specific team in this specific moment carries professional and cultural value that extends beyond any contract number, is operating as a gravitational pull in those conversations, whether the official negotiations have started or not.
Then there is Azurá Stevens, and Stevens is interesting for a different reason, because she made her interest visible in a way that athletes almost never do before official conversations have begun. Stevens took to TikTok. She called Indianapolis a, quote, nice little city. She engaged directly with Fever fans in the comment section, responding to their excitement, feeding the energy back, participating in the kind of fan-player interaction that you simply do not engage in voluntarily if you have zero intention of going somewhere. Players are not oblivious to the implications of those interactions. Their agents are certainly not oblivious to them. When a player in free agency starts engaging with the fan base of a specific franchise on social media before a single official conversation has taken place, that player is communicating something. Not a commitment, not a signed contract, but a lean, a direction, a signal that the destination is already under consideration in a meaningful way. Stevens is a versatile wing scorer. She functions effectively as a secondary offensive piece off the bench, the kind of player who can provide scoring and floor spacing in bursts without needing primary usage to be effective, who makes the second unit more dangerous without disrupting the rhythm of the starting lineup. She is precisely the archetype Indiana identified for their targeted free agent search, a specific player for a specific structural need, someone who fills an exact gap rather than someone the front office is hoping to adapt to a role that does not quite fit. And she is sending signals loud enough that anyone watching closely can read them without squinting. The Clark effect does not stop at the boundary of players who are already wearing Indiana uniforms. It reaches across the league. It enters free agent living rooms. It shapes conversations between veterans and their agents about what best fit actually means in this specific era of women's basketball. And when those conversations happen, when a player sits across from her agent and they're going through the options, running the comparisons, thinking about what the next chapter of her career looks like, Indiana keeps winning those conversations before the formal negotiation even begins. Now let's address the salary cap situation, because this is where critics think they have a winning argument, and I want to dismantle that argument completely and thoroughly. The 2026 WNBA salary cap sits at $7 million. Indiana has approximately $3.4 million already committed between Clark, Mitchell, and Boston, 3 All-Stars consuming roughly half the total payroll before a single additional roster move has been made. Layer in meaningful raises for Hull and Cunningham that reflect genuine contribution to a winning team, and the working budget for the rest of the roster drops to somewhere around $2.5 million for 7 additional players. The critics hear those numbers and reach immediately for the familiar argument: top-heavy roster, the cap is going to crush them, they cannot build real depth, the math does not work. It reads like a confident takedown until you examine it carefully. That analysis is not just wrong, it is backward, completely backward. It misunderstands the fundamental logic of how championship rosters get built under a hard cap, and it has been misunderstanding that logic for the entire time it has been deployed against Indiana. Championship roster construction under a hard cap has never been about distributing money as evenly as possible. It has never been about making sure everyone is compensated at perceived market value. It has always, in every sport, in every era, in every league with a genuine hard cap, been about spending in precisely the right places and then filling the remainder with exactly the right people. The teams that win under hard caps are the teams that concentrate their resources at the top, build specific competencies around that core, and then leverage their competitive attractiveness to recruit contributors who are willing to accept below-market contracts in exchange for a legitimate chance at winning something meaningful. Indiana's plan is a textbook execution of that principle. You commit maximum resources to the 3 players who define your ceiling: Clark, Mitchell, Boston, half the cap, completely worth it when those 3 players represent the best player in the league and 2 All-Stars. You pay your critical role players, Hull and Cunningham, raises that reflect genuine contribution without overpaying for perceived market premium. You identify one targeted impact free agent and you sign her at somewhere between $400,000 and $600,000 to surgically address your most urgent structural need. That is Smith, if those conversations progress the way the signals suggest they might. Then you fill out the remaining spots with veterans on minimum deals, players who have made a conscious, rational decision to prioritize a championship opportunity over a larger contract somewhere with worse prospects. And you add a productive rookie on a cheap, controllable deal through the draft who can contribute immediately in a role player capacity without requiring significant financial commitment.
12 players, 3 stars, 2 key role players, 1 targeted impact addition, 6 minimum contributors. That is the blueprint. And for the record, that is also exactly how the Golden State Warriors built one of the most dominant dynasties in the history of American professional sports. 4 championships, not through 12 max contracts, not an all-star at every position, through 3 elite players at the top: Curry, Thompson, Green, surrounded by a roster built around specific competencies, specific character, and a shared commitment to winning that made the team greater than the sum of its individual parts. Steve Kerr did not win 4 rings with balanced payroll distribution. He won them by concentrating resources at the top and then filling every other spot with purpose and intelligence. Indiana is running that exact playbook, adjusted only for the salary scale of the WNBA. The underlying strategic logic is identical in every meaningful way. But here is the piece that gives Indiana a structural advantage that Golden State at peak dynasty never actually had. The Warriors were a great ring-chasing destination. They were not the greatest ring-chasing destination in their sport. Other teams competed with them for veteran talent willing to take below-market deals. LeBron James built his own version of that at various points. Other franchises periodically assembled situations attractive enough to pull experienced players looking for one last run at a title. In the WNBA right now, Indiana is not just a great ring-chasing destination. Indiana is the ring-chasing destination, the singular one,
Full stop. There is no other franchise in this league that can simultaneously offer a championship-caliber roster built around a transcendent talent, a fan base that fills arenas, and treats the product with the kind of passionate, emotional investment that most franchises never develop, regardless of their on-court success. A $78 million practice facility coming online that will be the most advanced in the entire league, and the opportunity to share a locker room with the most famous and most culturally significant athlete in the history of women's professional sports. That combination does not exist anywhere else, not even close to existing anywhere else. And the veterans who have been grinding through losing seasons, playing in half-empty gyms, representing franchises with no clear direction forward, those players know it. They're going to call Amber Cox and the Indiana front office and tell them that whatever the minimum is, they are in. And Indiana is going to have a depth of options to choose from at the minimum level that other franchises simply do not get to consider. That is a competitive advantage built into the structure of Indiana's situation that translates directly into a roster outcome that the cap math alone cannot capture. Now let's zoom all the way out, because when you look at individual moves, Mitchell signed, Hull effectively retained, Cunningham returning, Smith interested, Stevens signaling, you see a series of good roster decisions. Each one stands on its own as a quality outcome. But when you look at the full chessboard, when you see all the pieces in relation to each other and in relation to the sequence in which they are happening, you see something completely different. You see a front office that is not reacting to the market, they are shaping it. Step 1. Secure the core immediately. Done in the first 48 hours. No hesitation, no prolonged process. The 6 foundational pieces were locked in or effectively locked in before most of the league had begun their planning cycles. Step 2. Target free agents who fill specific structural needs, not stars for their brand value, not names that generate headlines without addressing actual roster gaps, specific competencies at specific positions. Mitchell is not a random target. She is the answer to a documented defensive weakness. Stevens is not a name pulled from a free agent list. She is the archetype that fits the exact structural role Indiana identified as their priority addition. Every target has a reason that connects directly to what Indiana needs to function at championship level. Step 3. Use the draft to add productive talent on minimum salary. Indiana's pick in this draft is not an afterthought. In a $7 million cap environment, a productive rookie on a cheap, controllable deal who can contribute immediately in a defined role is a genuine competitive advantage. Every dollar saved on that roster spot is a dollar that can be allocated elsewhere, and the developmental upside of a quality rookie adds flexibility that pure veteran rosters do not have. Step 4. Let the Clark effect close every remaining conversation. Because when free agents sit down with their agents and line up Indiana against every other option available to them, roster talent, coaching quality, facility, fan environment, cultural visibility, brand exposure, genuine championship probability, Indiana wins that comparison almost every time without even trying. The argument makes itself. Clark's gravity does the closing for the front office before the formal pitch has even been prepared.
That is a complete system, not a reaction, not a scramble to fill holes after a disappointing season. A pre-designed, sequenced, ruthlessly efficient architecture that operates on multiple levels simultaneously and uses Clark's cultural pull as the force that makes every other piece function more smoothly, more affordably, and more quickly than any comparable effort in this league. And the cookie tweet? The 5 words that took over Chicago on the worst day of the Sky's offseason? That is not the epilogue to this story. That is the proof of concept. That is the moment that demonstrates with perfect clarity and with a scale that is genuinely unprecedented in women's sports history exactly how powerful this mechanism is and what it means for everything Indiana is building. Clark can dominate a news cycle without playing basketball. She can take over the biggest sports city in the Midwest with 5 words on her phone,
on a day when that city is consumed by its own franchise drama, without any organizational support, without any strategic planning, without anything except her existing cultural footprint and a genuine enthusiasm for a baseball team's anniversary celebration. She makes an entire league's worth of free agents want to join her team just by being exactly who she already is, doing the things she has always done, existing in the public space the way she has always existed. That is not media hype. That is not a bubble waiting to pop. That is a structural reality of the current WNBA landscape that Indiana has correctly identified and is correctly leveraging in every decision they make. The cookie tweet is data, it is evidence, it is a measurement of something real and large and consequential. And while Chicago was processing the grief of losing Angel Reese and the national sports media was filling airtime with hot takes about the Sky's dysfunction, Indiana was watching that 5-word tweet light up every timeline in Chicago and understanding exactly what it confirmed about the blueprint they were already executing. May 9th, 2026, Dallas Wings at Gainbridge Fieldhouse. That is when the regular season begins. That is when the rest of the league gets its first live in-game look at what Indiana has actually assembled. Every player acquired, every contract signed, every signal answered, every free agent conversation that ended with someone leaning toward Indianapolis, all of it crystallizes on that night into something concrete and visible and undeniable. Based on every signal this offseason has sent, every signing, every retained player, every credible report pointing toward mutual interest, every TikTok comment from a player testing the temperature of a fan base, what the Wings and every team watching that game are going to see is not a team getting ready to compete in another long-shot run. It is not a team built on potential and optimism that might develop into something threatening over the next few seasons. It is a team that has identified a championship formula, executed it at every level with speed and precision that no other franchise matched, and arrived at opening night ready to make a statement about what women's basketball is going to look like for the next several years. The blueprint is not hypothetical anymore. The pieces are in place. The foundation was poured in 48 hours. The walls went up over the following weeks, and the structure that is now visible is one that the rest of this league is going to have to spend the entire season finding answers to. Caitlin Clark typed 5 words. The Cubs said yes. Chicago stopped talking about Angel Reese for 24 hours. And somewhere in Indianapolis, a front office watched all of it unfold and knew, with the quiet confidence of people who understand exactly what they have built, that the machine was working perfectly. The dynasty question is no longer hypothetical. The evidence is in. The only thing left is to play the games. And based on everything this offseason has revealed, that part of the process is going to be worth every second of attention you can give it.